Minister Hajdu, thanks for being with us. You were in Grassy Narrows for the groundbreaking on Wednesday. Good to see that finally moving ahead. Is there anything the federal government is looking to do to help expedite complete remediation of the English Wabigoon River, and any plans to hold the owners of the mill accountable?
Well, thanks. I mean, let me just back up to the treatment facility itself. This is an extraordinary piece of work by Grassy Narrows to see this completed. And I will say they've worked incredibly hard with consultants, with architecture consultants, with designers to make sure that the treatment center itself is built to meet the needs of people living with mercury poisoning. There's also a 30-year commitment for operating costs attached to the center, something the community felt was essential in terms of providing the confidence to community members that the center would be there for the entire course of someone's lifespan, really. I mean, these are folks that are, in some cases, very and significantly affected by mercury poisoning, and of course it's a debilitating disease that can get worse over time. It was really wonderful to see elders in the community celebrating. In some ways, celebrating feels like a weird word, but really celebrating that there will be a way for community members to be cared for at home, surrounded by culture and language. In terms of the restoration of the river and the waterways, look, what we've seen is the provincial government refused to take seriously the protection of waterways, whether it's in Grassy Narrows in the English River system, whether it's other emissions in areas that are known to be contaminated with companies that have infractions that aren't followed up on. This is actually very concerning for, I think, all residents of Canada, certainly residents of Ontario. And it is partly why the defeat of Bill C-61, or I guess the conclusion of Bill C-61 was so disappointing in the fall session of the House of Commons. That is one area where the federal government has some ability to help First Nations protect their water sources through water legislation for First Nations people. But as you would know, Dennis, water protection in provincial waterways is completely at the discretion of the provincial governments, who have the jurisdiction and the responsibility to do that work.
And in terms of holding the owners of the mill, many owners over the years, but holding them accountable?
Again, the province of Ontario has an opportunity to do a better job with previous and with current owners who continue to violate regulations that are there and intended to be followed so that people don't find themselves in situations where the water or the land is poisoned. The federal government has very few tools to be able to impose our own infractions or stop orders or indeed orders for cleanup. And the end result is exactly what we saw yesterday, millions and millions of dollars paid to help manage illness that in many cases, in the case of mercury poisoning, is not reversible. We have to do a better job across all levels of government. That's why it's important that we do have legislation that ensures that when major projects move forward, that First Nations people are part of the conversation, part of the wealth creation, and part of the people that have the tools and the capacity to be able to monitor how natural resource projects are done within their traditional territories.
Minister, it's been about a month now since major changes were made to Jordan's Principle. An Indigenous Services Canada memo made it seem like things were getting approved under Jordan's Principle that should not have been. Was ISK approving things that should have not been approved, and what responsibility would it take for that?
Well, I think Indigenous Services Canada has done a really admirable job with over $8.8 billion worth of Jordan's Principles products and services approved since 2016. That means a lot of care for kids. But we were following the CHRT orders to, try to approve those products as quickly as possible to ensure that we weren't imposing barriers that would make it more difficult for kids to get care. And what's become clear is that we all need to work under parameters that give communities community members, give families, and give providers confidence that we can continue to do this work together. Part of that is making sure that we have a better line of sight on what is needed when and how we prioritize those requests. And I can tell you that we are starting to see improvement in the backlog because we are actually improving our own processes and because we're asking more of providers in terms of the details that decision makers need to approve requests.
We've heard of things like Saskatchewan's food and infant program being cut due to the changes in Jordan's Principle. Can we expect to see a number of programs being canceled with these changes?
I actually think we'll see a strengthening of programs and we'll see a strengthening of accountability for programs. And I think that's the balance we need to get right. You heard yourself, Jordan River Anderson's family talk about the intent of Jordan's Principle getting subverted through kinds of claims that, really in their minds weren't the intent of the original Jordan's Principle movement. I would say that there are, organizations that have put in large group requests without details about names of children getting care, ages, dates of treatment care, where the resources are going. And I think everybody expects better. And so I think we can do that together. And our goal remains the same, that kids get the care that they need, that every level of government is working together to make sure that kids, no matter what their no matter whether they're First Nations, no matter whether they're non, that we have a Canada where every kid feels like their lives matter and their lives have value. And that's, what the work of Jordan's Principle is ultimately, to make sure there aren't gaps in care. It's not meant to replace care. It's not meant to replace services that should be available through, for example, provincial systems. It's been really disappointing to see provinces try to offload responsibilities for education to Jordan's Principle. That's not the spirit of Jordan's Principle, but I can tell you the federal government is committed to continuing to closing those gaps, working with community organizations, and if there are First Nations organizations that are worried about their funding or their approach being jeopardized by changes to Jordan's Principle, they should reach out to the department and make sure that we are all working together to ensure those kids that they're providing those services for have what they need.
Minister Hajdu, your party will elect a new leader this weekend and in turn a new Prime Minister of Canada. What do you think Justin Trudeau's legacy will be when it comes to improving the lives of Indigenous peoples?
I've been really proud to serve under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the space of reconciliation in particular as his Minister of Indigenous Services, but coming from a community that has a high percentage of Indigenous people, I can tell you that reconciliation 10 years ago wasn't a word on the tip of the tongue of many Canadians. Indeed, it wasn't on the tongue of Conservative politicians, and we had seen a decade of Indigenous peoples feeling ignored, abandoned, indeed, in some ways undermined by the previous Conservative government led by Stephen Harper. And we made this a priority for our government. In fact, the Prime Minister repeatedly said that the relationships with Indigenous people were the most important and that we needed to do a better job. And so since 2015, expenditures have gone up, over $200 billion in expenditures in terms of settling land claims, making sure that we had equity in education funding, child welfare changes, self-determination work. We're starting to see the results of that, not just spending, but really evolving of how we conceptualize working with First Nations and Indigenous people. Self-determination is, it sounds like a phrase to so many people, but what it means is control of child and family services. It means ensuring that you have the trained water operators to keep your water systems working properly. It means that First Nations communities have control and power over how they're going to deliver services and evolve their communities. And that's the work that I'm most proud of over the last decade.
Minister, we'll leave it there. Thanks as always.
Thank you so much.